Today I have the privilege to present a project that has been going on for a few years in our lab, and that is about the journey to develop some electrophysiological assays to characterize iPSC-derived cardiomyocytes using automated patch clamp systems. So one model that we are using in our lab to reproduce cardiomyocytes is those induced pluripotent stem cells that I will also call hiPSCs during my talk. This model is actually very useful because it allows to generate an infinite amount of cells, and I will talk a little bit about those stem cells, even though probably most of these people in this room know the technology already. So those stem cells are generated from somatic cells. So we can take fibroblasts from a skin sample or a blood sample, and by using different transcription factors, we can differentiate them. Actually, we can transduce them and put them back in time at an earlier stage and put them back in a pre-embryologic state. By put them back in pre-embryologic states, we generate those iPSC cells. Then those iPSC cells can be differentiated and matured in some specialized cells, like iPSC-derived cardiomyocytes. So those iPSC-derived cardiomyocytes have been originally used for regenerating disease or sick tissues. And so with the infinite amount of cardiomyocytes that we can get from this model without using animal experimentation or human patients biopsy from the heart, we saw like many advantages of using those iPSC-derived cardiomyocytes. And we think that in combination with our technology, so automated patch clamp system, we can find many other applications. So indeed, there is still a requirement for quality control and characterization of those iPSC-derived cardiomyocytes. And I will call this automated patch clamp system APC, which is really close from iPSCs, but hopefully we will all understand each other. So we think that the combination between those technologies, so this iPSC's technology with our APC system, can help to characterize and help for the quality control of those iPSC-derived cardiomyocytes. So as I mentioned before, those stem cells are taken from patients, so it can be healthy patients, but also sick patients. So meaning that we can use APC and work with iPSC's cardiomyocytes for disease modeling and drug screening, pharmacology, drug safety, and probably at one point, personalized medicines. So this project and our vision during this project was to develop electrophysiological assays for the characterization, but also the screening of those iPSC's cardiomyocytes. And first of all, I would like to go through the main challenges that we had during this entire project. And we had quite some. So over the few years that we have been working with those iPSC's cardiomyocytes in our lab, the main challenge that we had and the biggest challenge is in the differentiation and maturation protocols. So we are not really involved in the differentiation protocol. Indeed, we are working with cell providers and collaborators that provide the cells to us and that take care of the differentiation, but we are involved in the maturation process. And we have seen a huge variability in the cell lines coming from different cell providers, but also from batch to batch coming from the same source. And we have huge variability from batch to batch. We also sometimes, when we receive cell line from those cell providers, we can see that the cell population that we get is very heterogeneous. And we sometimes end up with cell type that is not the cell type that we're interested in. And finally, and this is a general problem, when we study iPSCs, derived cardiomyocytes, is the fact that when we receive them, they are on immature states. So to face those challenges coming from these first points, we are working in strong collaborations with cell providers and also other university collaborators to improve the differentiation process. So we always go back and forth, depending on what we see, what is the cell line that we're receiving, and we're trying to improve that with them. The second point that I have listed here on the slide is something that we are dealing in-house. So for the use of automated patch clamp system, we need to use a cell suspension. So the cells have to be in suspension to be studied and to do electrophysiological measurements on APCs. The thing is, when you work with cardiomyocytes, you know that they like to be very cozy and tight together, and they really like to form those very dense tissue-like cell culture, like you can see here. And when you have to lift them up and do a dissociation protocol to take them out from each other, you are damaging the tissue on a pretty high level. And also, because you are damaging the tissue during the harvesting process, of course, you end up with a lot of dead and dying cells, with cell debris and some cell aggregates, and sometimes even other cell types that you don't want to deal with. So to overcome those challenges, we have been working in the lab into our maturation processes to optimize our harvest conditions, to purify the cell suspensions in order to just get rid of all the other debris and aggregates that we don't want to deal with. And our last processes was the sorting cells. So we use a cell sorter to make sure that we end up with only the cells that we want to record. So as I mentioned before, we are not involved in the differentiation process, but we taking part in the maturation process. And we have been working with different strategies that increase the cell maturity. There are different parameters that you can play with, and we have been, so they are all listed on this slide. And in our lab, we have tried different things, and we have tried different media with different chemical modulation, but also we know that current and ion channel expression is a good sign of maturity of the cell. So we have been recording those cells on our APC at different time points during the maturation. So when we receive the cell from the cell provider, we put them in culture from 1 to 3 weeks, depending on the instructions of the given by the cell provider or our collaborators. And one thing, so we have now a good starting point to improve this harvesting conditions, but we discovered that we really have to optimize this process at every time we're receiving a cell line. So at every time we're receiving a new cell line or a batch, we have to re-optimize those conditions and work with those different parameters. So one solution that we have seen in our lab to improve the quality of the cell suspension is that to replate the cell. So indeed, when we have this kind of super dense tissue-like cell culture, what we do is that we replace the cells at a lower density, and we wait 24 hours to start our recordings. During these 24 hours, the cells, so we get rid of most of the dead cells, and the cells that survive, they have the time to recover from this kind of stressful event that happened to them, but also they don't have the time to form those very tight connections that will make our job hard to actually harvest them. And so in the second step, then we can use a general gentle dissociation that will give us a single cell suspension, and we will be able to start our electrophysiological measurements. So even after this first step, when we improve the cell quality during our harvesting condition, we still end up with this kind of cell suspension, where we have our target cells, so our hiPSC cardiomyocytes, but this target cell is surrounded by dying cells, dead cells, other cell types, and cells aggregates. When we use these cell suspensions without doing anything to them, so without sorting anything, we end up with a 10% success rate on our APC measurements. Our success rate is based on different parameters, such as membrane resistance, cell capacitance, and even some amplitude of certain currents like sodium. So when we add another step, when we actually incubate our cell preparation with DNase to make the cell suspensions less sticky and to get rid of most of the cell aggregates, we can increase our success rate by a factor 2. And finally, this is something that we have been doing in our lab, is that we have been working with a cell sorter based on molecular and functional markers. And you can see here that after using the cell sorter that is very targeting our cell type that we want to work with on our APC machine, then we are getting rid of most of the other cells. Of course, we still end up with some dead cells, but it's nothing compared with the first cell suspension that we get before cell sorting. So the thing, and you can see here, when we use the cell suspensions after cell sorting, we have a 40% success rate. So we are able to multiply by 4 the success rates that we had at the beginning. The thing that we have noticed is that you need to use a cell sorter that is very gentle on the cells, because you will use those cells right after the cell sorting. So they will directly be put on our machines to do electrophysiological measurements. The other thing that we have discovered from all of this process is that we need to have a large sorting material, because we will lose a lot of cells during the sorting process. And now the fun begins. So we can finally do electrophysical measurements. And here, this is what you look here on the upper right. This is half of a plate. So we are using what we call a Q plate in APC machine. So those Q plates, they have 48 sites that can contain 48 cells. And here, this is half of a plate. So you have 24 sites. In green, this is the cells that pass the quality criteria. So as I mentioned before, membrane resistance, cell capacitance, and some current amplitudes. In red, this is the cell that we won't use because they didn't pass the quality criteria. And from those cells that we have received from our collaborators at the University of Göttingen, we saw that we are able, 80% of the cells that we are recording and that pass the quality criteria, 80% express the sodium channel. So you can see here, this is sodium traces, and here, this is from one cell, the IV curve that we get from our measurements. The second ion channel and current that we are interested in is this calcium channel from CAV 1.2. And in this specific cell line, 80%, a little bit less than 80% express this calcium channel. And you can see them here. And in red, it is when we add the nifedipine, so the blocker of the CAV 1.2. And here it is the IV curves from 28 cells, an average of the 28 cells without and with in presence of the CAV 1.2 blocker. Another current that is very important for cardiac safety, and we will that we really want to characterize when we do iPSC-derived cardiomyocyte measurements, is the hERG channel. So hERG channel is very small. This very, very small currents. This is the case in iPSC-derived cardiomyocyte, but this is also the case in the primary cardiomyocytes. So in order to be able to record them in APC system, we increase the extracellular potassium. So we go from a 5 millimolar potassium to a 75 millimolar potassium. And this is, and you can, this is very light, but in gray, this is when we have our normal potassium concentration in our extracellular solution. Here in black, this is when we increase the extracellular potassium concentration. And in red, this is when we block this hERG channel with a specific blocker. And again, you can see the average of 28 cells that we have recording, and we have made an IV plot over in here. The last current that we have been able to record, and that has been actually challenging because some iPSC-derived cardiomyocytes don't express this current, it's IK1. And this is the same. We use the same strategy as for the Hurk channel. We also increase the extracellular potassium concentration. And you can see here in black those traces that we can record. So this inward currents, this IK1 inward currents. We block this IK1 current with barium, and then we just subtracted those traces to the IK1 current to make sure that we only have traces that are sensitive to barium. To barium. So to summarize, in this cell line, we are able to record a lot of different currents that are important for cardiomyocytes. And we have different statistics for the different channels that we can record in this iPSC-derived cardiomyocytes. And we are also, of course, interested in the action potential expression. We discovered, and this is not really a surprise, that the cells that, if we want the cells to express action potential, they need to express all the other channels before. This is great to know because it's great to know to estimate what will be the success rates of our action potential expression in our iPSC-derived cardiomyocytes. And in this specific cell line, we were able to record action potential in 50% of the cells. So the second proof of concept that I would like to present you for today is that we are able to measure action potentials in those iPSCs cardiomyocytes. The measurement of action potential in those iPSCs has a large interest because of disease modeling and also cardiac safety and drug screening. And it is challenging because we know that iPSCs-derived cardiomyocytes are immature compared to the primary cardiomyocytes. And as you can see here, they express some current that they shouldn't express, some ion channel that they shouldn't express, but they also lack the expression of ion channel that they should express compared to their primary counterparts. And I don't know why. Okay. So here, this is, as I mentioned before, we were able to measure action potential in 50% of the cells that we have been recording. And as you can see here on the B panel, is that those action potential have a huge variability in shape. And it can be due to immaturity, it can be due to different parameters, but we are still able to measure some parameters from these action potentials, and which is the threshold potential, the peak potential, the hyperpolarization potential, and also the action potential duration at 90% of repolarization. And as you can see on this graph here, the highest variability that we have in our parameters measured is in this APD90, which is the action potential duration at 90% repolarization. And obviously we can see it here because the width of our action potential is very variable. So we can face this challenge, by playing on the maturity of the cells and maybe prolonged the maturation of the cells in our maturation process. But of course, it comes with other challenges, like we expose the cells to higher risk of contamination or mutation of the cells. But in the other thing that we can do on our level it's using the feature that Daniel mentioned yesterday, which is the adaptive current clamp. And this is a slide that you also have seen yesterday, but it is great for this iPSC-derived cardiomyocytes because indeed this is what you get when you don't use this feature. We also see that this iPSC-derived cardiomyocyte, and this is a general problem, they have a resting membrane potential that is more depolarized than what we are expecting from cardiomyocytes. When the cell that we are recording has a quite physiological, normal resting membrane potential, the use of this adaptive current clamp doesn't have a big impact. However, when we have cells that are very depolarized for the resting membrane potential for different reasons, Then when we use this adaptive current clamp, that will bring down the resting membrane potential of those cells to a more physiological resting membrane potential, then we can see a huge impact on the shape of the action potential. And this is the parameters measured before the use of the adaptive current clamp, and this is the parameters after. So we can just see that we just bring back everybody together. So we have less variability by using this adaptive current clamp. So finally, when we have a cell that is able to fire action potential in our APC machine, then we can play and we can modulate the length of this action potential by adding some drugs. And as you can see here on the upper left panel, we used an opener of a CAV 1.2 channel, this Bay K8644, and in red light, this is the lowest dose, and in dark red, light red, dark red, this is the highest dose, and we can see that we can increase this APD90 value. And we can plot this IPD value against the concentration and create a dose response. So this is a single cell, but here this is the average of 10 cells, and we can measure the EC50 of this compound. And on this lower level, we can do the same, but with a blocker of the CAV 1.2 channel, and we can decrease the AP90 value. So to summarize, I hope I convinced you that with the automated patch clamp system, we can characterize cardiac ion channels in iPSC-derived cardiomyocytes, and we can also measure action potentials. It has its challenges, and we have to optimize the cell harvesting, the cell conditions prior to put them on an APC system, but this is doable. We are facing main challenges, as you could see in this talk. Most of it is the lack of standardization, and we need to improve the quality control for this iPSC differentiation method. And we need to find a way to get more homogeneous cell line and also expression of action potential. Of course, we have developed this current clamp feature that will be soon available, and we are looking forward to hear the feedback from the users. That will be very useful. And finally, I think like the combination of the use of these APC systems with these iPSCs derived cardiomyocytes can really have an impact on the disease modeling, drug discovery, drug safety, drug screening, and at one point probably personalized medicine. So I showed you some data on iPSC's cardiomyocytes, but we also have been working with cell-specialized neurons and also primary cells. We are always open for new collaborations to do great science, and we also offer some travel grants and research grants that you can find on our website. And I will end by thanking my colleagues that have developed this project and have been working hard, the research scientists and other application scientists, and I'll take any question.
I have a question. Obviously, one feature of a mature cardiac myocyte is their ability to respond to isoproterenol or forskolin. Have you checked that in any of your currents to see whether or not there's any responses?
That's a great question. So maybe Sandra can answer this question.
Yeah, we've tested it. It does show a response that you would expect. So yes.
I have a question about the adaptive clamp. I don't know whether you're the right one to answer it, but or whether because I didn't catch it yesterday. Is it simply addition of a hyperpolarizing current, or is it addition of a modeled current?
Of a what model current?
Is it a modeled current? Because if you simply give a hyperpolarizing fixed current, you can bring the membrane potential back to the resting potential back to a decent resting potential. But it will also be present then during the action potential itself. And so it'll still keep driving the potential back down. So that would then change the characteristics. But if you use a hyperpolarizing current and then switch it off when the action potential starts, it'll be maybe more. I'm just curious what the clamp does.
But I think Sandra, which is the head of the research department, can probably answer.
Sorry, I'm Sandra. I look after innovation and new tech development, so this is something I've had a little bit to do with. And you're not injecting a current. You're doing voltage clamp, looking at the current in voltage clamp mode, and then you can clamp to that, and it will keep everything stable. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so you're looking at the resting potential.
Okay.
Thank you for your great talk. I was just wondering about the maturation that you did, and then also the confluency of your cell lines and everything. How was that? And I know after you do the sorting that helped a lot, but could you explain a little bit on that?
You mean about the harvesting process?
No, the maturation, because I know there's a lot of methods. There's like you could do like some mechanical, some electrical. Like which one did you settle in with? And then I guess the sensitivity of the measurements if you like do at different maturation stages.
So we are using different media, so maturation media,
Okay.
that we don't really know what is inside because this is coming with the cell. So every cell provider that we're using recommend one specific media. And we have also worked with different time points of maturation. And we have used, of course, some DNAs, ROC for inhibitors and other modulators to make sure that we have a better confluency. But for this specific cell line, we can see that we can record our best measurements are when we are at DIV 30 to 40. If we wait longer, we taking the risk to have indeed contamination, but also actually the ion channels, they arrive to a plateau. So our collaborators, they have recording the cells they are letting the cells mature to 80 days, and they didn't see any differences we have better calcium currents, but it has other impacts on other currents.
Thank you.
I think it's time for our next break, and then we'll have our final session.